Hi everyone, in this session we will see how to install GitLab runner and also configure it with GitLab CI. So if you look at the GitLab documentation, you can see all the information, how to install GitLab runner, configure it, register, and also set up the executors. So what we're going to do is in the installation section here, you can see that there are different ways you can install GitLab runner depending on the environment that you are working on. So if you want to install GitLab runner using a Docker container, you can use it. You can install it, and if you want to install using if you want to install GitLab runner on a Linux operating system or a Windows, all those options are available here. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to follow the Docker installation process, where here it says install Docker image and start the container. So here there are two options, and this two option is because if you are trying to install a GitLab runner and every time you restart the container or the system, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your configurations are not lost, right? So in that case, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the volumes are mounted correctly. Okay, so that every time the GitLab runner container restarts, it picks up the configuration. So for that, we have two options. One is to mount the volumes locally on your local system. So if you look at here, this is the Docker command for the GitLab, and you see here it says restart always. So that means whenever the system gets restarted, your container also will restart, means your container also will start. Then you have the volume flag here that says this is your local system volume, and this is something that is in the container. And the same thing, we are also having other volumes mounted here. And finally, I'm taking the latest GitLab runner image. So this is one option, to save the configurations to your local system. The other option is Docker volumes. So if you're creating a Docker volume, you can also have the configuration saved to that Docker, that volume. For example, you can create a volume using Docker command called Docker volume create, and you create a volume. And then when you're running the Docker run command, you can mount that to the volume, that is Docker volume here. That's what we are doing here, you see. Okay, see, this is the main thing here. If you look at here, the configuration is where that needs to be mounted. So what we are going to do is we are going to have this configuration, or you can say the volume, mounted locally. So let's copy this, and before that, let's go to our GitLab UI, and I am already logged in as a root user. And in the admin area, if I go to the runners, you can see that there are no runners configured. Okay, in previous session I had one runner which I removed, so currently I don't have any runners configured. So in this case, if I commit any changes to my repository, nothing is going to happen. Okay, because there are no runners configured to execute my pipeline, right? So one thing that you need to notice here is we have a section here that says set up a shared runner manually. So this information will be required when we register the GitLab runner. We'll come back to this section again, but this is something to show that I have no runners configured. So next what we'll do is let's continue with our installing the GitLab runner. So for that, I'll go back here and I'll just paste it. Okay, so it says, now you can see that this is the container ID. So as soon as I pasted it, it already executed the command. So to check the containers, now let's see this here, Docker container ls. Okay, so you can see that there are 3 containers currently running. One is the one that we created, B462. Okay, this is the one. And I have another container that is GitLab CE. This is nothing but the application itself, this GitLab. And the third one is the CD66PC container. This is something that I have created, previously 4 days ago. So this is something that you can ignore for now. Okay, this thing, but this is something that is the container ID B462. This is what we created by running this command here. And this is what we copied actually from the document here. Okay, so with this, we have the container up and running. Okay, so the next step that we have to do is, so the first part is done, the installation part is done. The next part is to register the runner. For that, let's click on this. It says the final step is to register a new runner. Okay, so let's click on this, and here it says the step, run the register command based on the mount type. Okay, for the local system volumes, this is what we have, and the other one is for the Docker volume mount. So we'll follow the first one because that's what we did. So copy this, go back here and paste it. And it's asking for enter the GitLab instance URL. Okay, now this is the URL which I was referring to in the admin area. You see here, install GitLab runner and ensure it's running. The first step is right. The second thing is register the runner with this URL. Okay, this is the URL of my GitLab. So I'm going to go back here and paste it and hit enter. Enter the registration token. Again, go back to our admin area, and here we see that add and this registration token. Copy this and paste it here. Enter a description for the runner. I would say this as GitLab runner, and I'll say this as 5. Okay, number 5. Perfect. And enter the tags for the runner. I would just say this tag as DevOps. You can give any tags. Okay, it depends on how you will be using this tag in your pipeline. For example, if this runner needs to be picked up, needs to pick up all the test jobs in your pipeline, you can have those tags here, and then you make use of these tags in your pipeline. Okay, so for now I'll just keep it DevOps. Okay, the next it says registering the runner succeeded. Perfect. The next is asking for enter an executor. This is what we we discussed in our previous session, where we use an executor depending on the environment where the job will be running. Okay, so all our jobs will be running in a Docker container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the executor as Docker. So enter the default Docker image. Now, the default image that the GitLab runner will use is Ruby 2.6. Okay, so we'll keep the default. We'll keep it as Ruby 2.6. Okay, and whenever we want to override this image, we can do that in our pipeline. So for now, let's keep it whatever the default we have. Okay, and finally, it says runner registered successfully. Feel free to start it, but if it is running low already, the config should be automatically reloaded. Perfect. So let's go back to our GitLab here and refresh the page, and you can see that we have the runner popped up here, right? So now any commit that you make to the repository, to your project, will be picked up by this runner now. Okay, so that's how we register the GitLab runner in our application, that is in our GitLab CI. I hope that was clear. We'll do a quick test. Okay, what we are going to do is we are going to go back to our IDE, and here what we are going to do is we are going to make some changes, a simple change, and push it to the repository and see if that if the GitLab runner triggers the pipeline, that is the GitLab CI gets triggered and the GitLab runner picks up the jobs. Okay, so for here what I'm going to do is let's add something here. Let's add in Spring, I would add tools. Okay, so this is the change that I've added. I'll save it and I'll commit this. And I would say this as dev tools added. And I'll say commit and push. Perfect. Now let's go back to our project and let's see. Okay, so here nothing happened. Okay, it's develop branch, I have to check. Okay, so here if you see it says dev tools added, but the pipeline it says pending. Okay, so why it says pending? It says this job is stuck because the project doesn't have any runners online assigned to it. Now this is because, you know, what it does is this is because if you look at the logs, let's see, check the logs of the container and we try to troubleshoot what the issue is. Okay, docker container ls, and this is the GitLab runner, and we'll say docker logs before, and what it says is it says it's not healthy and will be disabled. Okay, it's not defined, session endpoints disabled. Okay, so there is something wrong with the GitLab runner that we created. Okay, so let's look at the config file. Okay, and the config file can be seen in this folder in our local system. So let's go to this path. Okay, and here I'm going to, okay, so now if I have to switch the user, okay, now I'll say, let's see what are the files that we have here. Okay, I have config.toml file, and I will do an edit. Okay, so if you see that these are all runners that I have in my config file that are from my previous sessions, but this is one that we created. Okay, this is the one that is GitLab runner 5. So if you look at here, there is URL. Okay, this looks good. The token, the one that we created, all this information we added when creating and registering the GitLab runner. Now, one thing that we have to add is the, you know, if you look at the clone URL here, the reason why we have to add here is, and this might not be, you know, required in your case, because what is happening is the GitLab runner will try to clone the repository to the container. Okay, so when trying to clone, if you look at here, for example, if I go back here and if I try to clone, you can see that it's saying GitLab, you know, I have a domain name here, right? So every time I try to clone in my IDE, I manually updated it with my IP address, right? Because I don't have the DNS setup, and I can do the DNS setup in my host file and all those configuration, but that is kind of out of scope, and we don't want to do that when we are, you know, we don't want to make it more complicated. But the simple way is, you know, when we're trying to clone it, I use the IP address. In your case, you might not need it because might be the network team already have configured your DNS with the system, so no more configuration is required. But in my case, I have installed it in my local system, so when doing that, it is failing to clone the repository. So for that, what we do is we use this clone URL and put it here. Okay, so that way, remember that this URL is different. This is the GitLab instance URL, whereas this is the clone URL. Fine. And if you don't give this URL, this clone URL, what it's going to do is it's going to use this. Fine. So with that, let's go back here and save this. Okay, so what else we have here? I think that's all. We have volume as cached. That looks good. Perfect. And yeah, so this is good. Now come back here and I'll close this file and I'll go back to the okay. Now I'm going to say docker container ls. I'll restart my container because I have updated the configuration, and the command is docker container restart before. Okay, instead of giving the whole ID, I can just use the starting few letters. Let me use even a couple of more. Okay. This might take a while. Okay, so it's restarted. Now let's look at the health. And it says up 12 seconds. Okay, this is fine. Now let's go back to our repository and try to refresh. And you can see the previous, okay, this is not the one, it's develop. And let's go to here. And what I'm going to say, I'm going to cancel this and trigger the pipeline again. And this will be on develop. Okay, so let's look at the admin area here and let's see if we have everything configured. Yes, everything is, it says configured. Yeah. So one more configuration that we are missing here is, the run untagged jobs. Now, if you look at the configurations that we have for our application, let me duplicate this tab here and let's go to our project. Okay, so in our develop GitLab CI, we don't have a tag that would specify that which runner should pick this up, right? This stage unit test, we don't have that information here. So what will happen is by default the GitLab runner will not pick up the job because it says, okay, nothing has tagged me, so I won't pick it up. So in that case, what you have to do is go back to the admin area, in the runners configuration, say that run untagged jobs and save the changes. Okay, so whatever configurations that you made, like few of the configurations, you can come back here and like description and all those, you can definitely change those here. You can update here in your runners configuration. Fine. So now let's see our pipeline. Go to CI CD pipeline here, and now you can see that it is running, right? And the default is, okay, the one that we have mentioned in our CI YML file was the Maven image. So it did not pick the default, that is Ruby 2.6. So with this, we have now successfully configured our GitLab. We have installed our GitLab runner. We configured it. We also looked at some advanced configuration, that is the clone URL in the config file to update the IP address instead of DNS. So in case if you are facing any issue with, if the job says that was not, the GitLab runner is not able to clone the repository, then you can go to your config file and update the configuration saying clone URL and give the the correct IP address or the, and that is a configuration that you will be doing if you don't have the DNS set up for your GitLab tool. So in our case, we always had to do what, manually update the clone URL. So in case if you see here, we do have the DNS, but every time we cloned it, we had to update the IP address. And the same thing happens with even GitLab runner. GitLab runner tries to clone the repository to the container, and it will fail because it's trying to pull this and it won't be able to find it. So that's the reason we updated the config file. Okay, so the next what we did is we went to the configuration of the runner, and we updated the configuration here, saying that indicates whether this runner can pick up jobs without tags. So if I use this tag here, we have a DevOps tag. If I use this in my pipeline in the stage that is here, and if I add another keyword called tag, and if I say DevOps, then this might get picked up. Okay, so that is something that we modified here. We just checked it and saved the changes, and the GitLab runner was able to pick up the job here. Okay, so I hope that is clear, and that's all for this video. I'll see you in the next. Till then, take care. Thank you.